going to talk about multiplying complex numbers and the powers of I. So you learned that I equals the square root of -1. Well, what does I squared mean? Well, if you know that the definition of I is the square root of -1, you're going to multiply that times itself to square it. So what does that mean? So the square root of -1 times the square root of -1. Well, what is the square root of anything squared? Itself, right?
Yeah.
So what is I squared? I squared is just -1. So if you had the square root of 3 times the square root of 3, your answer is just 3. Same concept, except we're dealing with I. So I squared is going to be referred to as -1. So when you're multiplying and you encounter an I squared, you're going to replace that with a -1. If sort of, it cycles through a few different numbers. So let's look at that. Let's look at what happens. I is just I, or the square root of -1. Same thing as I. What is I squared? What did we just learn I squared equals? If you take the definition, square root of -1 times the square root of -1, that just gives you -1. So what about I to the third power? Well, what did you get for I squared? You got -1, right? So if you break down I to the third power, that's going to be I squared times I. And what did you get for I squared? You got -1. So this is going to break down to be -1 times I. What's -1 times I? That is just -I. This is going to be a little confusing at first, but we'll get used to it. Okay, well, what about I to the fourth power? There's a couple different ways you can break this up.
I cubed.
You can do that, or you can do I squared times I squared. So I squared times I squared. Well, what was I squared?
-1.
So that's going to be -1 times -1. What is that?
1.
1. So it cycles. We're going to see that. So it's I, -1, -I, +1. Those are the 4 different things that it cycles through. So let's test that theory and let's do I to the 5th power. How could you break that up? I to the 4th times I, right? What was I to the 4th? We got 1. So that's going to be 1 times I, which is just I. So how would you break up I to the 6th power? I to the 5th times I. What did you get for I to the 5th? You got I. So what's I times I? And what is I squared?
-1.
What about I to the 7th? I to the 6th times I. So that would be -1 times I, which which is just negative I, right? And then what about I to the 8th power? You can do 7 and 1, you can do 4 and 4. You're going to get 1. There are 4 things that this cycles through. Okay? So do you want to do 4 and 4 or 7 and 1? Okay. So if you do I to the 7th times I to the 7th was just negative I times I. So that's negative I squared. Well, what is I squared? Negative 1. So that becomes negative times negative 1, which is just 1. What's hard on 1? There's a trick, so you don't have to do all this work. I'm just showing you how to derive it. Make sure you have a calculator. Or you can use, actually you can use your phone for this, if you don't have a calculator. So basically it cycles between I, negative 1, negative I, and 1. So it's I1, the middle two are negative. I'm going to show you that. There's the Barney song. I don't know if you remember. It kind of goes along with it, but I1, the middle two are negative. So basically these two are negative. That's how I remember the 4 different things. So there is a trick so you don't have to do all that work of deriving what each one is. You can find the decimal, and we're going to practice that. So let's say you had I to the 50th power. Okay, you don't want to do all the work to get to 50. But what you can do, get your calculators. Okay. So there's 4 things that cycles through, right? So you're going to take the exponent, which is 50. What is 50 divided by 4? 12.5. So the decimal ended in a 0.5, right? The answer is negative 1. We're going to practice these. So, because there are 4 different things that cycle through 1, 2, 3, 4. Always. Yes. Let's practice it. So if you have I to the 37th power, what I like to do, so the first thing I like to do is I1, the middle two are negative. And we have, what was the progression? 0.25, 0.5, 0.75, 0.0. So, what is 37 divided by 4? The decimal ended in 0.25, so that's going to be I.
You can put I squared, you just put negative 1.
It's going to be I, negative 1, negative I, or 1. One of those 4. So what's 22 divided by 4? 5.5. So that was negative 1. What's 68 divided by 4? 17, so that's 0.00 technically. So that's going to be a 1. what is 275 divided by 4? So that's going to be a negative I. So remember this page, you may have to refer back to this page when you're doing your work. I1, the middle two are negative, and then 0.25, 0.5, 0.75, 0.0. Yeah. You can remember this though. It's not bad. I1, the middle two are negative. Okay. Any questions about that? Cool. So the next thing we need to talk about is multiplying complex numbers. You're probably going to have two binomials, and you have to use FOIL, or you can just think of that as distributing. But you know how to multiply binomials. You've done that forever. So when you get to this part where you're multiplying your i's, this is going to end up giving you an I squared. So when you get that number, you replace it with a negative 1. So you replace I squared with a negative 1. So let's try a few. Start with the basics. What's 4 times 5i? 20i. You don't have to change anything. It's not I squared. So what is 8i times 4i? So that's 32i squared. You're going to replace the I squared with a negative 1. So that's going to be negative 32. You replace the I squared with a negative 1. Okay, so let's ramp it up a little bit. So what is 2i times negative 5? Negative 10i. And then plus 12i squared, because you're multiplying I times I. And you replace the I squared with what?
Negative 1.
So that's going to be negative 10i minus 12. But in order to be in the correct form, remember, it has to be in the form a plus bi. So we're just going to say that's negative 12 minus 10i. Yes. Okay. Next example. This is when you have to FOIL or distribute. FOIL stands for first, outer, inner, last. So the first terms would be 3 times 1. What's 3 times 1? 3. Then your outer terms, so that's going to be 3 times 7i, which is what? 21i. And then your inner terms, 2i times 1, which is just 2i. And then 2i times 7i is 14i squared. So we can combine those. What's 21i plus 2i? Bring down your 3. And then you replace the I squared with what? Negative 1. So that's going to be 3 plus 23i minus 14. Now you can combine those. What's 3 minus 14? Bring that up front because that is your real number. So So you get negative 11 plus 23i. Moving on. Okay, so what does that mean? 2 minus 5i and all in parentheses squared. So this means if you were to expand this, yes, 2 minus 5i times 2 minus 5i, and then u4. What's 2 times 2? 4. What's 2 times negative 5i? Negative 10i. And then what's negative 5i times 2? Negative 10i. And then what's negative 5i times negative 5i? Positive 25i squared. Now we can combine the middle. That's going to give you negative 20i, and then 25i squared. Replace the I squared with negative 1. All right, so and that's going to be minus 25. We can combine the 4 and the negative 25. What is 4 minus 25? Negative 21. So you should get negative 21 minus 20i. Last little section. So a conjugate is where you change the sign in the middle. So if you had a plus bi, its conjugate would be a minus bi. Only the sign of the bi is changed. So if you had 6 plus 4i, what would the conjugate be? 6 minus 4i. Okay? So like when you have difference of squares, where you have something like x plus 4 times x minus 4. Yes, that is random numbers. I made up this one, and I said, what is the conjugate of that? 6 plus 4i, its conjugate would be 6 minus 4i. If it tells you to multiply. Yes. So the next one, we're going to do that. We're going to figure out what the conjugate is, and then we're going to multiply. So if we have 2 plus 4i, so the conjugate would be 2 minus 4i. What is 2 times 2? 4. What is 2 times negative 4i? Negative 8i. What's 4i times 2? Just positive 8i. And then what's 4i times negative 4i? Negative 16i squared. Okay, so what happens in the middle? What's negative 8i plus 8i? 0. They cancel out. Let me just do that. So we have 4. What? So we have 4 minus 16i squared. I squared is negative 1. Negative 16 times negative 1 is just positive 16. So your answer is 20.